In this video, I want to discuss the Democratic primary that's going on for the governor's race in the state of Michigan. I feel like it's one of the more interesting upcoming primaries on August 7th. And just give a rundown of the candidates, the situation right now, going over some of the polling. And then also I want to take a look at what happened back during the 2016 presidential primary in the state of Michigan and how that plays over into this race potentially. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to give my take and prediction on how I think things are going to shape out. So starting off here with the polling data, some of these sources are a little bit more reliable than others. Out of all of these different sources that we have to go on, the NBC News Mayor's poll, I would put probably some of the more credible stance on, even though it is a relatively small sample size in terms of the accuracy of the polls and their ratings over at 538. I would say that that's one of the more accurate results that we have here. And in that poll, you have Whitmer at 35%, Thanedar at 25%, and El Sayed at 22%. So a pretty competitive three-way race in that particular poll. But also, just to discuss this race more in depth, we have three candidates here that have definitely separated themselves in terms of the camps that are supporting each candidate. So you have Whitmer, who has the Democratic establishment behind her, more of the Hillary Clinton type candidate in this race. And then you have Abdul El Sayed, more of an unknown coming in to this primary season. He's been able to get his message out there traveling across the state, and also he has the support of the progressive groups behind him, as well as the endorsement of Bernie Sanders, which I think goes a long way in helping him in a state like Michigan, where Bernie Sanders surprised in his upset victory over Hillary Clinton. And also Bernie Sanders coming out and campaigning with El Sayed down the stretch, I think, can have a big effect, especially with a large number of undecided voters in this primary. So in terms of the polls that we've seen, usually it's somewhere between about 15 to 25 or so % of voters that haven't made up their mind. And that means that pretty much every candidate has a shot at going on and winning this one, even though you would give the odds-on favorites to Whitmer at this point because she's generally been ahead in the polls, as we can see from the data here. And also the fact that she has a lot of that establishment support behind her in terms of getting more money behind her campaign than maybe somebody like an El Sayed's been able to do just through small dollar donations and individual contributions instead of taking the corporate money that Whitmer has taken into her campaign. But then also Thanedar, an interesting wrench he's throwing into this race because he really doesn't have any support or major endorsements behind his candidacy in comparison to the other two. Of course, Whitmer with the establishment, El Sayed with the progressives, and then Thanedar, basically, from what we know, a lifelong Republican who all of a sudden decided he wanted to run for governor in the state of Michigan as a progressive. And the fact that he is a very wealthy individual, he's been able to pay for a ton of advertisements, and that's gotten his name out there, which actually makes him relevant in this case. Even though he doesn't have those endorsements behind his candidacy, he has the funding, which is another one of those important things that you need to get the vote out. So as the page updates there, you can see it's a relatively competitive race here, but Whitmer has generally been ahead. But we haven't gotten more recent polling data in the last couple of weeks, and that's important to note because with Abdul El Sayed having Bernie Sanders come in and campaign for him in the month of August, and then also having Ocasio-Cortez go across the state with him more recently, I think that has a big positive effect on El Sayed as well and brings more legitimacy to his candidacy as all of these important progressive figures are coming and supporting him. But moving on from this polling data, I want to show you another poll that was an internal poll from Abdul El Sayed's camp. It is the largest sample size that we have of about 1,500 voters. But I will note that it is an internal poll, so that has to be taken into account as well. But bringing that up here on the page, and you can see it asks if the Democratic primary for governor of Michigan were held today, who would you vote for? And again, Gretchen Whitmer ahead, but Abdul El Sayed within striking distance, down by about 5 or 6 percentage points, and then Sri Thanedar a bit lower at 15 percentage points. And in terms of how this race might shake out, I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up being this kind of a number between the three candidates. Even though Sri Thanedar has generally done somewhat respectable in the polls, the fact that he doesn't have weight behind his candidacy from major endorsements or important figures within the Democratic Party I feel like that is going to be a negative detractor down the stretch, especially with those undecided voters. I don't think that many of them are going to break for Thanedar, because if they haven't done that already with all of the advertisements he's been pumping through the airwaves, I feel like he could be fading here down the stretch and really becoming more of a two-way race between Whitmer and El Sayed, who have more legitimacy, or perceived legitimacy anyways, behind their two candidacies. And then also, if you go back to the debates that we've had between these three candidates, every single one of those debates, Thanedar did not do very well. He just is kind of out of his element in that situation, because English isn't his first language. And then you have Whitmer and El Sayed. And in those debates, it was pretty apparent that El Sayed did a better job in general in those debates. He seemed a lot more genuine in his answers, while Whitmer kind of had that Hillary Clinton syndrome where it seemed more rehearsed. And I think that plays a little bit negatively in that sense. But then you also have to think, how many people actually saw those debates, and is that a big enough difference to close the gap that Whitmer has been able to build over the rest of the competition? So things have been tightening up compared to the polls that we were getting earlier on in this race, and a lot of the polling data, basically all of it actually, has been done before the big endorsements such as Bernie Sanders behind El Sayed. So that's really not factored in to these polling numbers that we're getting. So I think that can be a big boost to El Sayed. So now I want to move over to what happened in the 2016 presidential primary. This was one of the biggest surprises that we saw back during this particular primary. Bernie Sanders going on to win the state of Michigan by about 1.5 percentage points. And obviously, if El Sayed is able to get the percentage of the vote that went to Sanders, then he'll go on and win this primary. But easier said than done, even with the support of Bernie Sanders now behind his candidacy. But I want to scroll down to the map of Michigan, and the green counties are where Bernie Sanders did well, and the blue counties are the ones, obviously, that Clinton was able to get the majority of the vote. And what's interesting about this race is the fact that El Sayed, I actually feel like he's going to be able to get a larger percentage of the vote in areas where Clinton was able to do well, because he's the health commissioner from Detroit. So we go down and look at the major population center here. It's cut off from the page here. Let me scroll down a little bit more. And you can see this is really the area where Hillary Clinton was able to make things competitive. She beat Bernie Sanders in Wayne County by about 60,000 votes, which is quite a significant margin in comparison to these other counties where it was much more competitive, the ones that she was able to get a larger percentage of the vote. And then more across the rest of the state where there isn't quite the same population that you're going to get in the city of Detroit, Bernie Sanders was able to get enough margins across the rest of the state to make a difference and get him to win at the end of the day. But if El Sayed is able to pick up these population centers around the city of Detroit and do about as well as Sanders was able to do across the rest of the state, given the fact that he has the endorsement and support of Sanders behind his candidacy, that can definitely allow him to potentially close this gap with Whitmer in the closing week of action. So it's a very interesting race, certainly, and I actually think that El Sayed is probably going to be able to win these counties in and around Detroit, and I wouldn't be surprised if Whitmer was able to win a lot of these lesser populated counties that Hillary Clinton wasn't able to win. And it's kind of the reverse situation, which is highly intriguing and interesting to see if that actually ends up being the case, because you would think that it would be the Bernie Sanders voters overwhelmingly going for El Sayed and the Clinton voters overwhelmingly going for Whitmer. But I actually think it could be a little bit of a different situation here based on, of course, El Sayed being the health commissioner in the city of Detroit, and then also a lot of these more rural voters and outside of the city of Detroit areas might be more in favor of somebody like a Whitmer, who they're more accustomed to and they know her name in the state of Michigan. And I think that might be able to help her out across the rest of the state. So I can't wait to see how this particular primary plays itself out in the state of Michigan. I feel like Thanedar, even though he's put a ton of money into this race, the fact that he doesn't have the either Democratic establishment behind him or the progressive groups behind him is probably going to make him fade here down the stretch. And I'm predicting that Thanedar is going to finish in third place. I don't think he's going to be able to get a lot of that vote that is currently sitting in the haven't decided area. And then it's just going to come down to, I feel, Whitmer and El Sayed. I really could see it potentially going either way. You can make a strong case, certainly for Whitmer, given the polling data. But the fact that the polling data hasn't shown the recent bump that I think El Sayed is going to get from Ocasio-Cortez, as well as the big one, Bernie Sanders coming and backing his candidacy, is going to give him, especially around the population center of Detroit, where it's so important to rack up the vote in these Democratic primaries in the state of Michigan. So with that being the case, I actually feel like El Sayed is going to be able to eke this one out, maybe by 1, 2, 3 percentage points in that range. But again, if Whitmer does go on to win this one, I wouldn't be completely surprised based on the polling data that we've been seeing. But again, the difference maker I see here is Bernie Sanders coming in and putting his thumb on the scale in favor of El Sayed. And I think that makes a difference in a state that is a big-time supporter of somebody like a Bernie Sanders. When Sanders went in and won Michigan, he didn't have near the name recognition of that Hillary Clinton had, obviously going into that race, but still was able to get that progressive message out there, which really resonates with a lot of Michigan voters. I think that's the difference maker here. So again, guys, I see El Sayed winning by a very slim margin at the end of the day, but again, one that really could go to either side. So I can't wait to see how this one plays out. So thanks, guys, for stopping on in. Leave a comment down in the comment section to give your take on this race. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and then also you can check out all of my poll analysis and prediction videos over on my YouTube channel. So subscribe for more. Hope to see you guys back here in future videos. Bye.